if you have any information. I love my new shirt. Unsolved Mysteries Volume 2 is on Netflix, and I'm happy. I think that if you liked the first volume, you're definitely gonna love the second volume, and if you're anything like me and you're a paranormal lover, this volume is for you, because they do have one paranormal episode, and I decided instead of going in the order that Netflix automatically played them, or just going in order, I would read the description and figure out what I was most interested in and do them in that order. And I think that really makes a difference for your overall feeling of the second volume. And in my case, I started off on the right foot because I love me some paranormal. So the first episode is called Tsunami Spirits. So this took place in Ishinomaki, Japan. And fun fact, if you want to know something about me, I spent some time in Japan from when I was around 2 or just before 2 until the beginning of 2nd grade. My sister was, I have a younger sister who's 2 years younger than me. She was born there. And but we didn't live on the mainland of Japan. We lived on in Okinawa on Kadena Air Force Base, and so it's the chain of islands outside of the main island. I loved living there. It was beautiful. I remember I went to Bob Hope Elementary, and I went to kindergarten and 1st grade. They had, from my memory, the school was really nice. They had like multiple playgrounds. I think it was a pretty big school. I remember taking the culture classes. I had like 1 or 2 culture classes where they taught you about Japanese culture. And I remember this like folder that had a shishi dog, which I think they're supposed to ward off bad spirits. They're supposed to be good luck. I remember it was blank and you had to color it, and it was like your folder for the year. And tons of really fun activities. That school was amazing. I wonder if it's still there. So the episode talks about the March 2011 earthquake and tsunami, and then the paranormal events that followed. So they showed some footage of Ishinomaki, and it looked beautiful. It was a really, I don't know what's the word. It was a place that did very well just because of being on the water. Typically places that are on the water are ports, and they get a lot of their economy from that and tend to flourish. The people there tend to do really well. So they reflected on that life before the earthquake and the tsunami. And interestingly enough, one more note about my time in Japan, I don't remember experiencing any earthquakes while we were there. I do remember typhoons. Typhoons, as you probably know, are like hurricanes, but I think that they're just called typhoons in different parts of the world than hurricanes in other parts of the world. And I think they may rotate different directions. I could be wrong. But they showed the footage of the earthquake happening on like security cameras, and they showed the tsunami, and they showed whole houses floating down streets. It was horrifying to see. And then they also talked to survivors of this event, and they gave their individual accounts. So I have a note here too. When I was watching this, it made me think of where I live now. I live in Seattle, and you're always hearing about, you know, we have mountains here, but they're also volcanoes. So here in Seattle, the big mountain here is Mount Rainier. There's Mount Hood. I don't know if Mount Hood is in Washington or Oregon. I feel like it's in Oregon. And then Mount St. Helens might be in Washington. But Mount St. Helens, as you know, it erupted in 1980, which is, I was born in 86. Like, that's pretty recent. That's a concern here. And then if there would be, you know, if it was a big enough earthquake, if it would be a tsunami. That's why my father-in-law refuses to move here, because he's convinced that we're just going to fall off into the ocean and just like go away. So oddly enough, after the tsunami, it started to snow. I don't remember it ever snowing when I lived in Japan, and it was in March. So March is like springtime, right? I mean, I know different parts of the world have seasons. Like, I think Australia is like opposite from here. When we're experiencing summer, they're experiencing winter. So I don't think it's like that in Japan. So I think it was weird that it would snow after the tsunami, but that was horrible for the people that survived the tsunami. They're out there in this water, and now you've got snow on top of that, and you're fighting for your life in water. So some facts about the tsunami are that it reached 131 feet. Confirmed dead were 15,854, and still missing was over 2,500. One survivor told his account of losing his whole family, and that one was so sad. He had a wife and 2 kids. One was a baby, and he found them all. Like, there's no words. I couldn't imagine that. An interesting detail that I learned in this episode about Japanese culture is apparently cremation is more common than burial, but the crematorium had been flooded, so it was not working. So they had to bury their dead to go back and resume their bodies to have them cremated when the crematorium was working. But that was an interesting fact to learn about Japanese culture. At one point in the episode, we meet an author who wrote a book called Stay Near Me, and that book was based on accounts from survivors and accounts of the paranormal events that followed the tsunami. And according to the episode, they talked about how about 3 months after the tsunami, people started experiencing some really weird things. Another account was from a woman who lost her 3-year-old child. It was her son, and after she lost him, one of his toys would start up on its own. And apparently it had a button that you had to push, like that it wasn't possible for the toy to start up on its own, and so she took it like her son was still there with her, and it gave her comfort because she was distraught, as you can imagine, after her son died, to the point where she told her surviving child that she didn't want to be alive anymore, that she wanted to go and be with her son. And as a mother, that hit deep. And it was discussed in the episode about how in Japanese culture, they don't have a very strong separation between the dead and the living. And one thing that I thought was really interesting when I took a class in college called Philosophy of Religion, we learned about so many different religions, and the class, instead of focusing a lot on at least the in America, the most well-known religions, like the bigger religions, we learned a lot about the lesser known religions, at least lesser known to us, like Eastern religions, like obviously a lot of people have heard of Hinduism, Buddhism, but also in Japan there's a religion called Shinto, where it's like a bunch of different kinds of spirits, and it's been a long time. It's probably been like 9 years since I read about this, but I'd love to go back and read that book. I actually kept that textbook to read for fun, and I'd love to dig it out. If you would let me know if you'd be interested in just talking about philosophy of religion, I would love to just talk about that textbook. I do not have an advanced degree in philosophy. I have no authority on anything, but I love learning about that kind of thing, and I love talking about that kind of thing with people that are also interested in it. I'm not religious at all, by the way, by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't know if it makes sense that I'm interested in learning about religion. But anyway, when we were learning about Shinto, I don't know if you refer to it as Shintoism, Shinto, I just remember it being called Shinto, and all the different types of spirits that they have within that religion. I just remember that being a lot of fun to learn about. So let me know if you would be interested in like a video on that sometime in the future. So the spirits that these people are seeing they say, are lost and don't know that they're gone. And so when somebody would encounter one of these spirits, they would tell them, you know, you're gone, you can move on now. There was even so there was a guy who, for his job, specialized in sociology of disaster. He was a teacher at one of the colleges there. And as a topic of study, he gave his students the topic of the ghosts that followed the tsunami. He believes that some of the most credible stories come from the taxi drivers who picked up people thinking that they were alive, only to get to their destination, like maybe it'd be after nightfall, go to drop off their passenger and the backseat would be empty. One taxi driver talked about how he did lose some family in the tsunami, and so he almost felt like he was doing them a favor in giving them a ride, and said that he'd be happy to do it again. At one point in the episode, a woman she was hysterical. She went to a Buddhist monk for help because she had said that she became possessed from ghosts of people that died from the tsunami. And she had no connection, by all accounts, no connection to the tsunami whatsoever. She hadn't lost anybody. She had not been through the devastation herself, although she did have a history of seeing ghosts. The monk had said that she was the most possessed person that he'd ever seen. And during interviews, classic Unsolved Mysteries, old school style, her face was in shadow, so she didn't want for anybody to know who she was. During an interview with the Buddhist monk, he talked about how possessions are not really his forte. That's not what a Buddhist monk traditionally deals with. But he felt for her and for all the people that had been through the tragedy and were experiencing the aftermath. And so he helped her as best as he could. And that inspired him to help others. And if all he could do is just talk to them and give them a few minutes of relief, a little bit of happiness, being around other people and talking about their experiences and getting that out, he started hosting gatherings where all the survivors would get together to talk to him, to find some kind of comfort, maybe some kind of closure. And it seemed to be pretty well received. People seemed to really appreciate being able to have that outlet. He would tell them to not be scared of the ghosts because they weren't there to hurt them. They were just lost. They showed a tsunami memorial in 2019, footage from 2019. I don't know if it was erected in 2019 or if this was just footage from that particular year. But there is a monument dedicated to those that were lost in the tsunami. And in that footage, they were lighting so many candles. I know that in a lot of places has, significance, just lighting candles for the people that you've lost. And there was even, from the wreckage, there were personal belongings that were found. One showed a waterlogged photo album from somebody. And it's just crazy how you would find it in this wreckage. Somebody's life is in that photo album, and you don't know if these people survived or if they were lost, but it was such a beautiful but sad episode, and I thought that episode was really well done. It is by far my favorite episode from Volume 2, and that's how I started off. That's how I kicked off my binge watching. I watched this over the course of a few days. The next one that caught my interest was titled Death Row Fugitive. This took place in Mansfield, Ohio in 1965. Lester Eubanks is the person, well, I was going to say that the person that this episode centers around, but he's the bad guy. So really, we want to say that it was centered around Mary Ellen. In 1965, a young girl named Mary Ellen took a taxi to a laundromat with her sister after their dryer died in their home. They went to this laundromat to finish their laundry. Their grandmother lived right next door. They felt safe doing this. They went on their own, but they went in a pair. Her mother felt comfortable enough because her grandmother lived next door. But when they ran out of change, Mary Ellen went to go get change, but never came back. Her sister waited for her, and when she didn't come back, she ran over to her grandmother's house, and her grandmother went out to find her. And when she went out, she came across police and a crime scene where they found Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen had been shot, and the police found that the bullets matched a gun that was registered to Lester Eubanks. He was out walking around because his apartment was nearby where Mary Ellen was walking. He had just been released on bond for attempted rape. So he was a sexual predator, and he saw an opportunity when Mary Ellen was walking by. He was picked up by the police and gave a detailed confession. So he says that when he grabbed her, she started screaming and basically shot her to keep her quiet. He went back to his apartment to get ready to go to a club, and when he came back to check on her, she was still alive. But then he took a brick and you can guess the rest. So he took the stand during his own trial and was sentenced to death. For this episode, they did interview other death row inmates that were familiar with Lester. He was well known for his artwork, and that's what he spent his time doing in his prison cell. He would do artwork. There's actually apparently a book that showcases death row inmate artwork, and he's in this book. When the death sentence was abolished in Ohio, his death sentence turned to a life sentence, and he became the model prisoner. And because of that, he got special privileges. He got more freedoms. He was one of the inmates that got into this honor program for good behavior, for being a model prisoner. So because of that, he was able to occasionally venture out of the prison. It was supposed to be under the watch of a guard, and this was part of prison reform. It was supposed to help reduce the prison population. So during Christmas, with some other inmates, they went to the local mall to go shopping. The prison guard allowed them to step away from him to go and do their shopping and reconvene at a later time. Can you guess what happened? Of course, he didn't come back. They didn't say whether or not other prisoners escaped at the time with him. I'm assuming not, otherwise they would have mentioned it in the episode. So by the time that he escaped, it had been 8 years since the crime. They notified the family. Obviously the family is distraught. They go back and look, and they notice that he had regular visitors. He was a real popular guy. But leading up to his escape, the visits had escalated with certain family members. So the cops guess that he planned this plenty of time in advance, and that his friends and family were covering up for him and hiding him from the police. One thing that's really interesting, and I don't know how this happened. So I guess over time, from time to time, the police department revisits old cases. So this one officer was interviewed, and he talked about how when he went in and looked at Lester Eubanks' information, there were no warrants out for his arrest. 20 years later, there were no warrants. So if he would have gotten stopped and checked out, nobody would know that he was a wanted man. and they just chalk it up to a clerical error, and maybe it was. But he had some near misses. He got lucky, and it'll be interesting to see if he finally gets caught. That's what's so cool about this show, is when it originally aired, some of these did get solved. So, and I need to look back and see if Volume 1 resulted in anything. I don't know. I know that when Volume 1 of the reboot back in June or July of this year, of 2020, came out, they already started getting tips from some of the stories. So he was also featured on America's Most Wanted, and a woman called the show America's Most Wanted to say that he'd been living with his cousin's widow. Apparently, his cousin was a popular singer named Daryl Banks, and he was killed. And Lester was painting houses in Michigan before he went out to California, where his cousin's widow was. But on the bus ride out to California, the bus that he was riding in was stopped by police. And he thought that he'd been caught. He thought that the bus was stopped for him. But actually, it was stopped to search for and seize illegal fruit. When he got to California, he went and acquired a hunting permit, because apparently you do not need fingerprints to get a hunting permit, and you can use that, or at least at the time, you could use that for identification. So Kay is the cousin's name, or the widow's name. Kay Banks. So when she welcomed him into her home, when she was hiding him from the police, over time he bullied her, and she didn't like that. So she told him that the police called looking for him, and he promptly fled. So she was rid of that. His father was a minister who the police also believe knew where he was and was hiding that fact because he didn't want to have his son rearrested. He believed that his son was like forgiven for what he did, or he forgave his son for what he did. Refused to talk about Lester with the police. As of 2018, he has been entered onto the list of the 15 most wanted people in America, and there is a reward for $25,000 leading to his capture.